Good evening and welcome and happy Pride Month. My name is Allison Bainbridge. I want to thank you for joining us at Book Passage for an author event in celebration of Tommy Dorfman's memoir, Maybe This Will Save Me. We are delighted to welcome New York Times bestselling author of The Immortalist Chloe Benjamin as Tommy's conversation partner. Yay! So Tommy may be best known as an actor. She starred in Romeo and Juliet and 13 Reasons Why. But she's also a filmmaker, writer, producer, and now an author. Many hats. She's given us a beautifully written, bracingly original memoir structured through the profound revelations of a single tarot card reading. When I saw this, I thought, how clever. I have never heard of something like this before. So it's so fun to have something original. The memoir chronicles her troubled teen years, the highs and lows of her creative career, and her journey to self-acceptance. This beautiful line, "I'm determined to get to know the real Tommy, to trace the shape of my scars," comes from Tommy and her journey. After a lifetime of confusion, she finally gained clarity around her gender and began to transition. And now she says proudly that she loves being gay. And I saw that, I thought, loud and proud. That's awesome. Tommy's debut book is a luminously written, bracingly honest, and structurally audacious memoir of an artist whose vision transcends mediums. Chloe's quote on the book includes this lovely statement: "Maybe this will save me," is at once a love letter to the person she's been all along and to the mysterious, unending process of becoming. Please give a warm welcome to Tommy and Chloe.
Hey, everybody.
Hi. Thank you guys so much for being here. We're thrilled to spend this evening with you. And just to give you a little sense of how things will go, I think Tommy's going to give us a reading.
Yeah, I'm going to do a little reading because why not?
And then we'll chat for a few minutes and then we'll turn it over for a Q&A. So get your questions ready. You can be thinking as we chat. I just like to say that up front so that if things come to you, you can tuck them away. So
Great.
Tommy, over to
Yeah,
you.
I'm actually going to, this is maybe feels too formal, but I'm going to stand over here just so that I have a stand and.
That's perfect.
So I have a stand and a microphone. A book stand and a microphone stand. How is everybody? Good, amazing. I have not been, I don't know why it feels like I'm doing like a singer-songwriter acoustic set right now. I'm like, I've not been to Marin in years. No, but I really haven't, and it's such a treat to come back to the Bay Area in this phase of my life. I first came here. Actually, I first came to the Bay Area because of a boy that I met on spring break who lived in Palo Alto, and we fell in love. He's in the book. And I changed his name. But he's great. He's in the book. There's actually an email that I didn't send to him that I wanted to send to him that is just verbatim put in this book, which is really embarrassing. But and then I hadn't come back until 13 Reasons Why, and I spent, the better part of 2 years in and around this area, and I fell in love with it, and we shot the show here, and I just saw a lot of, I didn't know that. Yes. So I fell in love with this area in many ways, and then I think once the show ended, I was like, all right, we're good. I had my time here, and now that I'm back, I'm so grateful that this is what brought me back, and thank you to Book Passage and Chloe. All right, so I'm gonna get started. This is a little edited section from Ripen in the book. It's 149 if you have a book and it's helpful to read along. I know it's helpful for me. Hi, Nicole. I wrote this in, I think, like 2022. I wrote this section, and I was just reliving like getting sober and what sobriety was like at such a young age. I got sober at 21. Today's actually my 12-year anniversary. So this feels really beautiful, which nobody would have known, but except me and God. But yeah, so this is shortly after I got sober at 21. Eventually, as the hours turned into days and the days into weeks, and the weeks began to multiply, sobriety started to feel like the best fucking thing that had ever happened to me. Turns out I did take AA and myself seriously. The world had never been more lush, Food had never tasted so good, and my passion for sun salutations inspired me to enroll in a yoga teacher training session while I figured out what exactly my life plan was going to look like. Because, of course, I had to figure it all out that first year of sobriety. The summer sun would fill me with an urgent optimism as I city biked my way from a 7 a.m. meeting in Greenwich Village out to Soho for yoga, then back to the apartment I moved into with Peter, my now ex husband, at 89 Christopher Street, then eventually acting classes in Tribeca. I would experience the highest of highs, teetering on the edge of mania at times. Turns out the sober girlies had a term for it: pink cloud. It's the euphoria that freshly sober addicts experience early on in their recovery. They feel like they can do anything, but it doesn't last for long. While my head was caught in the pink clouds, I started making new friends. Other young people who also thought their life was over when they gave up partying, emphasis on the T for Tina, and traded $17 vodka sodas for $17 cold pressed juices. And in spite of my aversion to the religion of it all, I did talk to the universe in my own sort of way, thanking her for watching over me. I connected with my ancestors, dove into therapy, did my step work. I told everybody I was sober now. Aren't you proud of me? Aren't I amazing? Yeah. Most people my age thought it was a phase, an unnecessary or even annoying one, but it was my way of holding myself accountable to the world. As the child of a salesman, attraction was my agenda. I sold the world around me on AA and abstinence and the whole Om thing. I was flying with Helios, mindful of Icarus and avoidant of all things Hades in my life. For over a decade, rampant drug abuse had fried my brain, bankrupted me of most of my neurological prerequisites for sustained joy. So a few months into sobriety, suddenly my neurotransmitters began to come out of their comas. They began bubbling to the surface. Dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins. Was the world always this beautiful and harmonious? At first, it was the taste of ice cream. Like, had anything ever tasted as good as Ben & Jerry's classic cookie dough? I cried halfway through a pint. Wiped out from step work and yoga teacher training and being on my fitness, not to mention the mental Olympics of early sobriety, I sat down and opened a pint from the deli, as I'd been doing all summer, and it tasted like a fucking Bollywood film dance number was going off on my tongue. Euphoric. A small, simple life thing suddenly opened a portal of feelings and emotions I didn't know existed. Sobriety became the best fucking thing that had ever happened to me, and I wanted everyone to follow suit. I preached to friends, drug addicts, family members, strangers, pushed through glossed over eyes to try and make the world see how much happiness sobriety fostered. In hindsight, it was less about convincing other people to get sober as much as convincing the world that I had my shit together, that I was growing up and on the right track. And it worked. That first year, I felt every fucking feeling possible, basked in the glory of my own humanity, my own fragility, and yes, my own sanctimony. I cozied up to the voices in my head over a cup of fresh gingermint tea, and I tamed them. I laughed for my toes. I screamed, sang as I skipped down the halls of the LGBTQ plus center on 13th Street, claiming happiness as my default. But just as quickly as I'd ridden my sobriety to the top, so too was the crash a complete fucking whirlwind. Soon enough, I was thrown back into the reality and the melancholy of it all. Church basements and Waverly Diner lost their luster after the first 10 or so visits, and I began to wonder about the other parts of my life that had been ignored. Like, what the fuck would I do if I had to actually live for the next 60 years? I still had to be a real person. I mean, wasn't focusing on my sobriety enough? Wouldn't everything else, take care of itself? So, while this lust for clean, healthy living and working a strict recovery program laid the bedrock for my life today, it only temporarily fed the beast. The hunger for success that resided deep within me. I wish I could say that being sober and becoming a yoga teacher or healer or real estate agent or whatever the fuck would be enough for me. I needed, though, to find an outlet, a reason to live far beyond the emotional labor of getting well. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tommy. Considering that Tommy was just on Broadway, I feel like we all just got like a one-woman show. Like we should have had to pay for this.
You can buy a book.
There
I'll
you
sign it.
go. So Tommy, as we heard, you are an actor, director, screenwriter, and now memoirist, and I probably have left a few out. And I think it's so interesting to hear about how these identities jostle or interact in creative people.
Sure.
So I'm curious, what evolved for you first as a passion between acting, writing, or something else? I know you've also been a dancer. We've talked
Oh,
about
sure.
that.
Yeah, we've talked about that. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and I grew up doing ballet, and I was really strict and rigorous in my ballet practice until I started doing drugs, and then the drugs sort of became more important than the ballet, and then more important than everything else in my life. But ultimately, yeah, it started with ballet. It sort of like segued into musical theater. I didn't have the full instrument for that, singing. And I fell in love with acting. And it was kind of my like way out of Atlanta and my way out of the South in that time. And it was the only way I was going to get into a decent school because my grades were terrible. So I just kind of weaseled, and it's in the book, but it's like I weaseled my way into acting. And then when I was in New York, I was writing all the time. I loved writing, and I always wanted to like make movies and have a production company. Like I always had this like engine going that was deeper than just performing, because to me, I have this need to try and control things, which I'm learning how to let go of as I grow up as much as possible. But um, being an actor is quite a submissive role. I mean, it's a role of service to the director, it's a role of service to an audience. And I like to approach my directing work and my writing work as service, but ultimately I leaned more into that in my 20s and now 30s because it offered some autonomy and it offered some peace and it offered some time to reflect on different aspects of my life, either through creative, fictional characters in movies or through a memoir. And honestly, this book started in 2020 in the pandemic. I was transitioning and I didn't know if I would act again because I didn't know what that would look like as a trans woman. Like I just didn't know what my future was going to hold. And so I thought better now harness some of my other disciplines and play the long game is always kind of what I say to myself when I'm feeling like this immense pressure to succeed or get something done. I'm like, wait, you gotta like slow down, long game long, time takes time. Like I want to do this until I'm 90, whatever this is. So I don't need to rush every discipline. But as a result of that, my ADHD, I fear I've sort of like I'm like circling some professional drain, hopefully going to a good place, hopefully going to it's in sort of an upward spiral. But I think it's like I'm just not someone who could just be at the mercy of other people's will as an actor. It would be really, really hard, and also at the mercy of like a character. As much as I love doing 8 shows a week, and we'll do that again in a couple of months, or maybe next year, we'll see. And it's like I love that work, but the kind of like isolation that comes from writing, especially this kind of writing, while it has been the most challenging work of my life, it's also been the most gratifying, I would say, because there's a certain kind of catharsis that has come from it.
That's so interesting. I want to jump off of something that you said, but first to say that I totally relate to the kind of pleasing control that you can have with writing creatively. We've spoken about how I also danced, and I just found it so terrifying. Like you could slip on a spot of sweat and fall, and with writing you can kind of make it perfect before you send it out there. So it is a bit of a control thing. So you said this is the most challenging work of your career. Why is that?
For me, it just required a certain amount of focus and like um time and patience and um fighting with myself at the end of the day, just like a constant battle of versions of essays that could be this, could be that, but then also excavating my past in like a really visceral anthropological way, trying to be objective while also like having that perspective of what I think a memoir requires, while also putting myself back into that part of my body or that part of my past. That was really challenging for me. And I learned a lot in that process. And I think um, it really started out as uh, these like deep questions of like, how did it take me this long to transition? How did I get here? Why am I still sober? What is my family? Like, and the things that I've started using tarot for in like recovery to find clarity around things. That's kind of how the tarot became the skeleton of the book, because it was really just me not planning to write a book, but me just trying to learn more about what happened in memory and like what I maybe missed or blocked out from trauma or other things, and how could I reclaim some of that narrative for myself, and maybe it would haunt me less.
Yeah, that's true. I think memoir is obviously unlike any other kind of writing or unlike fiction in that it's, with fiction you can do it slant, kind of. And so,
Sure.
yeah, I can imagine how that's just a whole other level of sort of, it's almost like acting with embodying a character, but you had to embody your former self, maybe.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's interesting. People have asked me about process, and it's all over the place because I didn't go to creative writing school. I didn't go to school for writing. I went to school for acting, and everything else is kind of like either just like natural or innate, or I learn as I go, or I learn from my editor and I learn from other writers who read my work years prior to even starting the book, just like having that dialogue with other people, critiquing each other, trying to get better with each other. Um, but the process for this was at times like acting. I mean, there's one longer essay in here um, that is about like a man in his late 20s who sort of groomed me from MySpace. And I think, that essay, I kept trying to write it as like my 29-year-old self or whatever adult self. And I ultimately had to kind of just like write it from my 14-year-old perspective, because I needed that like grace and sympathy and like understanding, not for that person as much as like for myself at that time. Um, but so I think there were moments in which like I would just sit in a room in my apartment with all the lights off and like dictate the story to my notes app, and like fumble through stuff and then put it away for like weeks and then come back to it and transcribe it and then put it away for like there were a lot of stopping and starting in a lot of the essays in this book, because it just at times got too sticky. It just felt too sticky, and and I knew what was coming, because I think that the difference is in fiction, and I've had this experience writing screenplays. It's like sometimes I don't know what's coming. Like I don't know what the character is going to reveal. Like I could have a full outline for a script, and then it goes into a completely different direction, and then I burn it to the ground. But in this, it's like with a lot of these more complicated chapters of my life, I knew what was coming, and it was like I don't actually want to go there. Um,
And so how long did the writing process take? Because that's a hard headspace to be in over time.
Yeah, I took breaks. I write in sprints in general. Like that's just my process. It's like I wrote like around 100 pages between like 2020 and like about it in like a year and a half, and then sold the book, got real deadlines, uh, threw those sort of to the side, went and made a movie, and then it would be like while I was making the movie, I would be writing at the same time, because then it was like I got like a little bit of a brain break, and then I'd sort of like jump back in, or like long flights, for example. Like I started traveling a lot again when the world opened back up, and would have these moments of like isolation in which I just kind of had to like sit with myself and the work. So it started in 2020, and I would say like all the editing and everything was done around 2024, but my first manuscript I turned in towards the end of 2023. Caveat being, I also was like, in this book is also inclusive of work that was written in like 2011, because at a certain point it felt more honest. Like I would try to rewrite things, or I was like, actually no, I just think like this is the thing, and it makes, and it's like I can't do it better than I did it at that time, or I think pulling from our resources and our histories, and like not everything, I mean, everything is copy, but some stuff like actually will make it to the book too, right? And like what are these things that helped me get to the place to write the next thing?
Yeah, it's always so fascinating what winds up staying in until the end. And sometimes it's like something that you do so early and you have no idea. Like, I think that's one of the magical parts of the creative process.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the things that I really admire about this book, and which I told you after I read it, is how you weren't afraid to write from the middle of an ongoing journey. And it's honest and it's often very raw. And I'm curious, how did you negotiate vulnerability and boundaries throughout the course of this project? I get the sense from reading it that you went in like, if I'm going to write this book, I have to be as authentic as possible. But I wonder if there were also places where you decided to draw a line.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, so stuff. I would say I had a lot of changes, honestly, even between the galley and the final. Um, and I think part of that was maybe like a panic response of like, oh fuck, like this is actually going to be the thing that ends up going out into the world, and I can't like sit in the editing bay and like keep editing and editing and editing. Like I have a movie coming out in theaters that I directed in the fall, and like I had a meeting with the people who were distributing it last week, and I was like, I have to go in and fix this scene, guys. I'm sorry. Like it's just like this is like a non-negotiable. Like I can't promote the movie unless I can go in and fix this scene. It's just not that was not going to be the case. So I relied on people that I really, really love and trust and respect, including my editor. I was really fortunate to work with an editor that I had a relationship with prior to this book, and was a fan of his work as a writer as well. John Glenn wrote a memoir called Out East about his coming out, like a really beautiful book, but also is an editor that I really appreciate and admire, and he's great with memoirists and um, anyway, yeah, I was I'm not great at that, and so I needed someone to be like, you've taken it a step too far, or or there were situations in which, yeah, as I was like redlining the galley, the print copy, when I had this like really short window. If you come across a galley, which is possible in this life, it's like there was a long text conversation that I had transcribed between me and my ex-husband that when I was rereading it, I was like, I see why I put this here initially, but I actually think it doesn't service the whole story. And I think it makes more sense. Like it was like something that felt like I was being taken out of it as I had a little bit more distance from it. But that was something that my editor was like, no, I think it's great. And that was one moment in which I was like, I hear that, but I just don't. I think that kind of like, also it felt like exposing him in a way that like didn't feel fair, because not that he did anything wrong in the text messages, it's like all to prove a point that like I was insufferable at 21. Like that's the whole, like it's just me being like crazy. But I feel like the book has enough of that, it was like I can just say like, yeah, like I was like a gaslighting manipulative 21-year-old. Like I hope everyone is at 21. Like that's your time to do it before you grow up and have to stop being a dick. So I do think like there were those things for sure. And then it's funny because I had written, keep going back to this like this one part of the book about when I was 14. It's like I'd written it. I think it made a lot of people when we were pitching the book really uncomfortable to have like a sort of like 14-year-old perspective on what happened to me. And like that was actually, it was a really interesting thing where I was so sure of that
Yeah.
that I was like, you're not the right editor for me.
And
So you play that
yeah.
game a little bit.
And I remember how visceral that section is. Like that's one of the ones that stays in my mind. And so I think you were right. And it's a hard dance though, isn't it, to figure out like what do you be firm about, when you're given edits or suggestions, and what do you take,
Yeah.
you
And I
know.
also think people are coming at memoir stories, books from different lived experiences. Obviously, also like people who have maybe like a more conservative point of view or perspective on sex and drugs and recovery than mine, which is like quite lenient and kind of all over the place, just like by circumstance and how I was raised. So I remember like someone read the book and was like, God, it's just, did you need to put all that sex in there? And you're like, well, it's not just sex. Like there's and also like sex doesn't need to be this like so like super sticky stigmatized thing. It's like but in a way like yeah, because I think the conceit of the book and how I ended up with this title even is like, what are the things that I think are going to save me? Like, and it's just exploring. And it ended up being, after I finished it, I was like, oh, like these are all of the things that I did thinking that like this person or this drink or this drug or like this handbag was going to save me or this job or this geographic. So it kind of evolved in that way, I guess.
I think there should be so much more sex in writing. Like, it really bugs me because I'm like, this is a, you know, frankly, whether sex is a part of a person's life or not, like, it takes up space. And why do we drop the curtain at this moment of like, it's so juicy to write about those dynamics, like, no
It
pun intended.
is. No, well, yeah, it gets very juicy in there. But I also think it's like I had read so few things, at least that I could pick up in like a commercial bookstore or like an accessible bookstore, independent or otherwise, that had queer sex in it. I mean, truly. And like I didn't have like I learned how to have sex from having sex, which is just not how I think people should learn. And I'm not saying this is a guide to how to fuck if you're queer. That is not what I'm saying at all. But what I will say is like I've been every letter of the alphabet and I've had sex at every juncture and every turn and every exit, and like it has evolved and changed and flowed. And I think like if you're gonna be if you're gonna be a memoirist, which I now am, I suppose, although I don't know if I claim that yet, you're doing a service of some kind. There's a reason you're publishing the book, and like there's an audience you're trying to reach. And you could say like, no, I just had to get it out of my body and it needed to be on the shelf and forget about it. But ultimately, I had a responsibility in publishing something. I think we all have responsibility in art if we choose to put it out in the world. And part of that to me was like offering a more vulnerable, raw, queer experience that isn't always as accessible. It's more tangible now with the internet. Not that I had the internet as a kid, but it just was very different. So I think, and also this, I don't know, I don't know about you, but it's like for me, like the reason books changed my life is that it's like, especially now when I find the time to actually sit down and just fucking read, it offers me, it's like the only time in which I'm not doing 14 other things. It's the only time in which there aren't multiple screens at play.
I will never have a Kindle or anything, screen related for
It's so
books for that
hard.
reason. It is really hard. And I actually, one of my New Year's resolutions, which I had two, with the other one I've actually forgotten, so that's like not a good sign.
Like you literally don't remember
No,
it.
I don't remember
Thank
at all.
God. Yeah, okay. Great, good.
I'm killing it. The reading related one was more concentrated reading time, and as a writer, I'm like, God, that is so embarrassing that that's something I need to make a resolution about. But we are so I really think it's an addiction. Talk about addiction to the screens, to the multiple kinds of stimulation. And so I like have started, I'll put my phone away, I'll set a timer and know that I'm sort of in this space for that amount of time. And it's something I want to get better at.
Honestly, same. I'm just like I feel so burnt out in various ways and just like in the world. Like I find it really hard to focus right now, just being a human. That it's been really tough for me to read. And also like I spent 9 months doing theater, and it was like I kept thinking like I was going to be able to read more, and like in like but I realized I was like I didn't have the fucking time. Like it was like I was at the theater for 5 hours a day. I was in the kind of shows that required all of us like as an ensemble. And yeah, I feel like such a loser and such a fraud because I haven't read that many books in the last year because I've just been like working in other avenues, and it's been challenging. But I also at the same time want to offer this to like any artists in the room. Like you don't have to be a cinephile to make movies. You don't have to be the most well-versed, well-read person to write a book. Those are not requirements. You don't have to have gone to Iowa or fucking Stanford. Like you don't have to go to like a top tier Carnegie Mellon performing arts school to be an actor. It's like these institutions that we are funneled into or like are made aspirational are not always in service of art. And I mean, that's part of this is a cop out because I'm not like the biggest cinephile in the world. I'm not the most well-read person in the room. Like, and I know that. But I do sort of latch on to things that excite me and inspire me. I mean, that's honestly how we met, is like I was so inspired by your book, and I had read it when I was doing a different play and I had more time off stage, and it stuck with me since 2019. And then we finally get to be here today, and it's
We
like
finally met in person for the
yeah,
first.
we've been internet
Yeah.
friends for a while. Yeah, today's the first time we've met in person.
Yeah.
But it's like I'm been such a fan of yours forever, and I've been lucky enough to have a decade of working almost now where it's like I get to meet people that helped me and paved the way for me, and saw versions of myself that I'd never seen in a book, but in this book, like, so it feels like such a treat. And I can't like quote Proust, but like that's fine.
I also think that we
Yeah.
all feel like I don't think there's somebody who feels like I'm going to be the most well-read person in any room that I'm in. You know, like I think we all have
I know
that.
those people. I live in New York City.
Okay, well,
What do you mean? People weaponize their intellectualism and literacy in New York City more than any other fucking place in the world.
then you know it's just insecurity. And
Yeah,
like, they're
I'm like,
probably
I'm so
not-
glad that
yeah.
you went to Columbia.
Okay, well, I want to no, because I
You
feel
didn't
like
go
we
to
could
Columbia, did you?
no, no.
Okay.
I went to Wisconsin. I did go to an MFA, but it was Wisconsin. I feel like we could just keep chatting, so I'm trying to like keep an eye on my questions. So we talked about process. You talked about tarot. I want to talk about what I found was a really interesting part of the book structurally, which was the part where you go into your parents' perspective. And this is like a close third, if I remember correctly, from your parents. It's a very distinct voice and section in the book. Like you don't have I don't know that you write any other characters that way. And so I was curious, it almost feels like fiction. When did that become a part of the project? And how did your parents respond, if you're comfortable sharing that?
I felt like I owed them that, honestly. No, I really like they are so beautiful, and I love my parents, and I know that like having their kid who's sort of lived the version of life that I've had, or lived the life that I've lived, um which is to say I did a lot of my damage as a teenager in situations in which maybe they weren't as present as some parents are, which doesn't mean that they aren't good parents. It's just the reality of our circumstances. So I wanted to honor them in some way. I just didn't know what that way was. I mean, honestly, it wasn't. When I was interviewing them for the book, as I interviewed everyone in my family as much as I wanted to speak to them. So some people's opinions were not present in the book. And the truth in here is just the truth. But there were a lot of people, like I have this moment in which, and I'm gonna get back to my parents, but it's like I have this moment in which like I had thought for years that my whole life I thought my brother had lit all my girls' clothes on fire. And then when I called him about it, when I was gonna be like, fuck you, you knew I was a girl and you did that. He was like, what are you talking about? You did that. And I was like, oh, wow, memories are not factual. Like the narrative that I had spun for years and years and years, shared about in meeting after meeting, talked to every therapist about, was false. It was blotchy. So I did a lot. I tried to do as much fact checking as I could and throughout the process of this book. And with my parents, I don't know. I feel like I wrote this sort of during my Saturn return and at this stage of like adulthood that was getting more and more grounded and crystallized. And the recognition that my parents are human beings was really coming into focus for me. And I'd heard like crazy stories. You know, you get the crazy stories from your parents if you have parents and they like to share those things with you, like mine do. I'd heard the like drug dealing, crazy, whatever shenanigans they got into, but I didn't know the like deep lore. You know, I didn't really know their love story, and I think often we forget that the people who gave birth to us and gave us life and raised us, if they were present for that, also are human beings that had their own lives going on and are deeply imperfect and flawed and fractured people. Like we're all fractured people trying to put our pieces together. Like that's my experience, at least. And my parents were certainly that. You know, my mom was the youngest of 10 kids and like a very like sort of lower eventually middle class Air Force veteran household with a lot of alcohol and a lot of chaos. And my dad grew up with like a really insufferably narcissistic father and his siblings, and Jewish in the South, which had its own plethora of problems. And you know, they somehow found each other in like these weird circumstances, as I think like such a great meet cute. Like my mom was working at the daycare in which my dad's kids from his first marriage went to, and like he fell in love with her across the pool. She was 19. So, you know, and you're like, and so I had questions. I was like, okay. So he was 27, but still you're like, but it was a different time, sure. But also what was that love like, and how did you make it as far as you've made it? And they really started with like nothing. It was like 1 bedroom apartment, the 4 of them, dog mess, crazy, just debt, and built like a really beautiful lives for themselves, and provided for. I'm the youngest of 5, and we all had very different upbringings based on like socioeconomics and um, emotional well-being probably of our parents. So I don't know. I really was curious about them as humans. I was curious about where I came from and how I got birthed, and like how did that even happen. My mom had cancer while she was pregnant with me. Like there just was a lot of stuff that I didn't know, and um I didn't interview them with the intent of necessarily like carving out a whole section for them, although I had pulled this like emperor, and thus I threw the empress card in there because those two are in relationship to each other, obviously, or not obviously, but mom and dad, emperor, empress, king and queen, whatever, parental higher beings. So as I got into it, I was like, oh, I wonder if I should try writing about them like it is a fairy tale, and like what would that feel like, and really remove myself from it as much as possible, and like try to recreate the magic that they had and that they felt for each other, as a way to like deepen my empathy and compassion for them as human beings, flawed and otherwise, people that I love spending time with now and that I loved spending time with as a kid. And it ends up being one of the longer sections in the book, but I also like it felt really important to me, and I think it's true that like we don't know who we are without some of that reference point. And I don't think parents have to be the people that raise us as human beings at all. I was raised by a company of people, places, institutions, ballet, like wherever, it's like you find those teachers and etc. So I think, I don't know, it just felt like an interesting color on the canvas, that ultimately I think pays off really well. I mean, for me, it's also like nice to have a break from talking about myself.
I think it definitely earns its keep in
It's a
terms
palate
of like
cleanser. Not really, but
but I think like there are so many distinct pieces in this book in terms of tone, and it's almost like there's almost a mixed media scrapbooking element because you have texts, you have emails, you have that section, and then in the section where you're 14 and you're talking with this older person, is it AIM?
yeah, it's like AIM, sort of like MySpace chat. Yeah, it's like AIM chats.
And you had those?
I did.
You still had those?
No.
They were
Some
like
of those I had to
recreated?
recreate.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Some of those I did have to
Mhm.
recreate because I didn't have my AIM login anymore. But some text messages and emails that are in there are the ones that are in there. Like I was able to log back in. I had the foresight even when I was like on drugs to like take. I remember like I had like a computer that I'd backed up on a hard drive. The computer broke. Gmail was coming into the picture. Like Google Docs were like a thing, or like becoming a thing. I don't know. I started moving stuff into different files and just compiling like written histories of whatever. And I had written a lot about like a lot of half finished things about like wanting to get sober or thinking I could get sober that ended up being really useful in the book. But yeah, that there's a lot of mixed media happening. I mean, there's a whole section that's literally copy paste notes app. Yeah. Yeah, not from long ago, which is embarrassing now that I think about it. But it was sort of like the only way I could write about this relationship that I was in. It was like in spurts and moments of like the bleeding. Like I couldn't stop the bleeding on the train, so I had to take it to the notes app. And then when I tried to compile this like heartbreak that I was feeling and the embarrassment about the heartbreak that I was feeling, because I felt like I was a grown up and I shouldn't be feeling this way. Like, how dare I let a man make me feel this way kind of energy. It just like made sense to me to put it in, because I was like, also like feels really human, unfortunately. Like
We all use, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say we all use the Notes app, but I certainly do. And I saw this TikTok once that was like, there is no like deep cut like a girl's Notes app. Like it's everything from like grocery lists to like, it'll be like, you betrayed me, like, like a draft of like an email to an ex-friend.
totally.
There's everything and anything in the Notes
The
app.
14 ways that conversation should have gone.
Yeah.
No, that's like my notes app is that. It's
I
like
know.
random log lines, weird characters, things that I overhear someone else say that I think are funny. Like I love like Chekhov talks about how he stole all his dialogue from parties essentially. It's like you can kind of just like that's how writers you steal stuff. You steal stuff from all over the world. And I think this for me it's like I try to not respond to things quickly if I feel any kind of like temperature rise in my body, positive or negative. And so my notes app is really these like one-sided conversations of like edits and edits and edits of what I want to say or I could say, or if I have to, like I'm getting better at just speaking my mind in the moment, but I often have to write a script for myself if I have something important to say to someone because I'm too afraid that I'm just going to people please and not say it. So I have to be like, okay, I wrote down exactly what I'm feeling right now, and I'm sorry that this maybe will feel impersonal, but I need to read it. But I'm growing from that, I think.
Also, that's okay.
Also, that's fine. I mean, if that's your process, it can be your process. But I think, part of it is I'm trying to learn how to also just advocate for self in a present moment and not hold on to a resentment for 15 years.
I get that. So one of the parts of the book that I found really beautiful and interesting was your evolving sense of what womanhood means to you, how you embody it, how you define it for yourself. To me, this is a book both about seeking authentic identity, but also about potentially throwing out the idea that there is a single, consistent self to strive for, that the self evolves with us and with time. And that can feel scarier and more precipitous than the idea that like there is one version of me that will has always and will always be exactly the same. And while your experience as a trans woman is unique in that way, I also think to some extent there's a universal element to the fact that we're all trying to understand ourselves and figure out like what is authentic to us, what has been placed on us. So I'm curious, in your journey of writing the book, how has that changed your sense of identity? Do you think it's become more fixed or more fluid?
Certainly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All of the above.
Yes. Yes. And yeah, I think so. I think you and I are fortunate and maybe I presume a lot of people in this room, people who live in coastal cities, like there's access points for like self-reflection and like questioning self and identity, and there's an accessibility to that in our surrounding places, right? And I think that is not the case for most of the world or most of the country. And I think a lot about um, there are so many people who don't want to think about that, who don't want to challenge their upbringing or where they are, that don't want to put another thing on the thing. They just want to like do what they're supposed to do or what they think they're supposed to do. And I think one of the greatest gifts of being trans is that it was like I could never do that. And so and then as a result of that, everything else opened up and exploded because like suddenly that thing was not possible to like that was not a possible avenue for me to go down to be the thing that like my parents thought I would be or that like a society expected me to be. And so it put everything else into question, and it forced me to question every aspect of my life and identity and self and surroundings and who I spent time with and who I didn't spend time with and what I did and what I didn't do. Um, so yeah, it was like I feel like I'm at once trying to hold on for dear life and like not be swept away while also trying to evolve. Like it feels yeah, I'm just trying to like walk the tightrope,
Yeah.
you know, because I want to keep moving and progressing and growing, but I also don't want to keep blowing up my life. And like I have an affinity and a flair for dramatics, and so I just less so as the years have gone on, but like this book was a true reflection of like, oh, you don't have to like bottom out on everything to learn from it and grow from it, and like you don't have to explode these pieces of the puzzle. Um, that you then sometimes cannot repair in order to like learn and transition. I don't mean like I think we're all transitioning, we're all growing, we're all transitioning to me is so active. It's a fucking verb. It's not like it's not a destination, right? And I think it's a very human experience, regardless of how things are changing in your life, whether it's divorce or you have a child or you lose a child or you move or um, you take a different exit on the highway than you meant to, or you see someone across the bar and you fall in love. Like we're constantly like have offerings from life and the universe to go in a million different paths if we're looking for them. And I think like the gift of being trans is that like I'm more conditioned to look for them, and sometimes that means I'm more conditioned to look for an exit. And I'm like, oh, that's crazy. Like I'm really good at running. So part of my like human growth process is, I think, challenging our nature for me. Like for me, it's I can acknowledge that I'm not a person who sits still well. So a lot of the last year especially has been a practice of what if I did? What if I didn't do the thing that I thought I had to do? And to me, it's like, oh, like I was given a Broadway show that I loved doing and didn't want to leave, which then put me into another show, which then for the first time in my life, I was like in one city for 9 months. Like that hadn't happened since I was a kid. Wow. Because I was always trying to run. And it's been at times it's the first trip I've had like away from New York in so long. And it's been really beautiful, but I am having this like yearning to go home. Like it hit me kind of today where I was like, oh, I miss my dog and I miss my cat and I miss my couch.
Growth.
Maybe.
Maybe.
It's like, but it's like maybe the thing that will save me is the thing that's already there, instead of the running to the next thing is kind of what I'm trying to get at. I don't know if that really answered your question, but
I think it did, and I think like we should take all the forks. Like we should take all the exits.
I
This is
think
in our conversation.
forever. Yeah, in our conversation, but also I think like I don't know. I hope that I'm always like seeing another way through or out or in.
I think it has to do with imagination. And I think that's very core to being an artist too.
Yeah.
Um, so I think we'll end a few minutes after the hour since we started a little bit late. So I'll open up for questions in maybe 5 minutes. But until then, I have two more for you.
Great.
Okay.
I'm gonna try to be pithier.
Okay. No, you're doing great.
One of my goals this year.
So you write very directly about addiction in this memoir. You got sober at a pretty young age, but you also comment on it as this tendency that can take different forms. And I felt that a lot. I wrote an essay a few years ago about finally getting the right diagnosis around age 30 of OCD. And it took a very specific form for me, which I was able to treat through exposure therapy really effectively. And yet I've also come to see it as a feature of my brain that can kind of take different exits. Yeah. And, one that it's different than addiction, but it's maybe kind of a cousin. It's a very obsessive drive. And I also think it's connected to being an artist. So I think all this is interesting through that lens as well. I think it's contributed to my ambition and my ability to, for instance, follow through in finishing a novel. Sometimes people will say, like, how do you have the motivation? And I'm like, that is not my problem. Like, my problem is, I'll not take days off for weeks, So what has made the difference for me, I think, is understanding that I may not be able to eradicate that from myself, but I can be aware of when it's activating and latching onto something. And so I'm curious, like, does that feel related within addiction?
Like my artistry and addiction, or like
Well, I guess that I'd be interested in that, but sort of how it's like monitoring an impulse that can take different forms. Because you write about this in the book a bit.
Totally. Yeah. I think that I have like an insatiable need for everything. And so trying to channel that into work feels like the safer avenue to go down, the safer exit to take, to use the metaphor, the never-ending highway metaphor that we're on now.
You're never gonna get off. You're never gonna change.
You're never getting off the highway. A door to another door to another door. That's Caroline Polachek. So no, I think that yes, yeah, sure, yep. I think it's why I do so many things. I think it's certainly has a lot to do with not wanting to stay still. I just am a person who's always been uncomfortable. And I think that's like, to me, where my like the disease of sort of like addiction or alcoholism or these things that we understand it to be stems from is like a desire to not just be comfortable, but like uh hugged, but like not actually by a person. Like I'm like this like desire that I have to just kind of like escape, but not have to do the work of escaping. Like this feeling that like, oh, wouldn't it be just nice to just be. I was kind of talking about this the other day. I was so tired. I was like, oh, I wish someone would just like knock me out for a week, and like that's not normal thinking probably, but it does sound nice to me. And it's like, oh, maybe like there's other things I can do to not totally just disappear. But I do think that I have this like insatiable need to like explore and create and a curiosity, not about everything, but about specific things, obviously. So I do think that's, for as much as like this book dwells in the depths of addiction beyond just drinking and drug use, but like the other things that I overconsume because I don't consume those things anymore, or just because I'm a consumer, I'm a person who consumes a lot of shit. Um, I think, yeah, it can all be channeled in like negative or positive ways, and I think it's like it was all sort of worth mining and exploring in this. And if anything, the catharsis of writing a memoir for me has been the acknowledgement of some of these patterns that I maybe wouldn't have been able to see without the perspective of putting it all in a book. But I think that, yeah, I think that part of me is never going to be gone. So then it's just going to be a matter of like focusing it or or trying to have a conversation with it instead of just like following it impulsively. Um, but it sort of brings me back to what I was talking about before, which is like, what does it mean to like not run? And like those are the questions that I'm asking myself now. I wish I was asking those questions when I was writing this book, but I wasn't. Like, that just wasn't there yet. But maybe I'll write another book in 15 years and it'll be all about like running. But not ever exercising. That's what it'll be. But I do think that there's something there for sure. And I don't think I would be the artist I am today or the person I am today without that.
Yeah, that restlessness. Like if
Yeah.
you were deeply comfortable, maybe there wouldn't be that sort of drive to.
I don't think
Yeah.
so. I think I would be comfortable just like being like siblings like this and cousins like this. I'm like, they're just like chill. And I don't think that's not because like there's not shit going on underneath the surface. I think we all have that. That's why people like, you hear crazy stories. You're like, oh, Bob left Terry in the middle of the night. They loved each other so much. And you're like, well, clearly Bob had something going on. Like clearly Bob was not the Bob that we thought he was. Those are actual names of my family that are still married, and that's, I just, unfortunately, like that's what came to my head. They're not leaving each other. They love each other. But I just, those are the names that came to my head, and then I was like, shit, I just am like starting gossip that isn't true. But I think that we all probably have these desires in some way, and it's just how do they manifest?
Yeah. Okay, so before I open it up to questions from the audience, we've talked about some heavy topics, so I want to know, what was the most fun part of this book to write?
Ooh. Oh.
And if nothing comes, it can
No,
also
no, no, no,
like
no.
type of like part of the process.
Yeah, I would say that the best part of the process was the beginning,
Mm.
which I think a lot of people are like, it's so hard to get to the page, and like the beginning sucks. And I'm like, well, I was like driving a car with no GPS at the beginning, and that was so nice because I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know what I was doing it for, and that was so liberating. And then it got like, I suddenly felt like I was corseted too tight once like an editor and a publisher, and like the I do this thing, I talked about it in what I just read, where it's like, I'm sober, I'm sober, I'm sober, to like hold myself accountable. And this same thing happened when the book started to take shape. I just started telling everyone, I was like, I'm writing a book, to hold myself accountable. But then that made the process so terrible because then people are like, are you,
The book.
how's the book? And you're like, it's booking, the book is booking, and the book is a book, and it's a book, and do you want to read none of it? Yes. Like, And the book will happen or it won't, and I'll get sued. So it's like setting that up. But I think one of the more fun, I don't know if fun is correct, but one of the memories that I really enjoyed spending some time in is, and it's kind of dark, unfortunately, but it's like I had a best friend who I met at camp in high school who overdosed and died like a decade later when we were more grown up, and we were both trying to get sober at the same time, and I stayed sober and he had a different trajectory. And I carried a lot of like shame and guilt and like heartbreak about this for so long. And I remember like going to see his parents and like this feeling like this thing that happens when you're grieving or when I'm grieving, where I'm like, why not me, why them, like why does this happen like this, and then like an anger, and then all of the process, all of those feelings happened when he passed. And then I put it in a box, as we do, and I was like, okay, I've moved on from that person in that situation. And then every year around his birthday, it's like a flood of things come up because I just like loved him so much and I miss him so much. And I didn't get to be with him as much in those last years because I was scared of like what would happen if I spent time with somebody who was as active as he was at that time with his addiction. And I was so early in my recovery. And so there was something really beautiful. I really enjoyed going back to that summer 15, 16 meeting, and it's short, and I remember my editor was like, why is this in here? And I love him, but I was like, I don't know, but it has to be like, I don't, because if I don't have it in there, I don't know, like it needs to be. There's a lot of stuff that happened that isn't in the book and doesn't need to be in the book, but for me I was like, no, I don't know what to tell. I don't have an answer for it. I just know that like he has to be in the book. And part of that I think was because I really, unlike some of the stories of my life and the rooms that I had locked up for a long time that I never wanted to re-enter, but I ultimately had to. This was a room that like I really didn't want to leave. And like that was a rare experience for me in this process of like going back into a time in my life that I didn't want to leave.
That's so beautiful.
And it became like music, and it became playlists, and it became, and it was around the same time that I was making my movie, which was like a YA coming of age movie, my first film. And it was like I got to imbue his legacy and like our love in some of the relationships in my own way that like wouldn't be legible to even him probably, but like things that you find other outlets. But that was probably like one of my favorite parts of the process, was just like spending time with him in memory in a way that wasn't like scary or sad or like about death, but like actually about like love.
Oh, that's such a beautiful way to end. Thank you for sharing that. Wow, what questions do you guys have? And are we gonna, we'll have a,
We're going to do the mic because we're recording. So if you don't mind speaking into the mic for your questions, does anybody have anything? Well, I just want to. Oh, there is. Okay.
We had
Then
a
I'll say my
question.
comment.
Hi, I'm curious about where you love to write, and like if you could paint the
Oh,
picture, like is the dog there? Are the cats there? Do you have coffee, tea? Like
I
what's
need
that look
another
like?
cat. Well, I can tell you that I've tried a lot of things. I've tried like going on a retreat, but then it takes me a week to get my desk in enough order to actually do it, to do the writing. I'm there and I'm like, oh, it smells weird. I need this candle, and then I need this pen, and then I need this piece of paper, and that paper is 2 hours away because I'm in the middle of the fucking woods and I got to go back. And then actually maybe I should bring my desktop. And so it's like the ADHD sort of like cycle of avoidance and procrastination can take hold. But I think my writing it happens everywhere. It happens on planes. It happens on my notes app. Sometimes it happens in sometimes I like to go to a place that I don't want to be if I'm on deadline. So I'll go to like a coffee shop that I actually don't like. Because then I'm like, well, you can't leave. Like I play this like sick game with myself where I'm like, you're stuck here until you're done. So that will, if I need to get something done, but more often than not, like the gift of being an adult and an artist and getting to do this for a living for as long as I hopefully get to do it is that I don't have to wake up at 7 a.m. if I don't want to, unless I'm shooting something and I'm responsible to other people. And that's something I'm just getting comfortable with now. So like if I can't sleep, it's 2 a.m. and I need to write whatever it is, like I'll just do it. And then usually that I'll fall asleep in like 45 minutes. But it's, sometimes it's to me I as much as I can hold on, like ride whatever wave comes, I want to ride that wave. Even if that wave sometimes is 9 hours and it's brutal and I didn't eat and I didn't sleep and like I didn't walk my dog. You know what I mean? It's like suddenly like life happens around you and you're just like I'm stuck somewhere until it's over. But more often than not, like it's like claiming that inspiration when it comes and not being afraid of it, or not being like, oh, I'll do that. Oh, that's an interesting idea. Okay, let me do that later. It's like, no, wait, let me actually like I've learned with myself and my process, it's like doesn't matter where I am. It's like sometimes I just have to do it now. And hopefully not offend anybody in the process.
Hi.
Hi.
I have so many matching pictures with you of this story, and especially like the tarot thing, because I almost gave you a pack of tarot. I came to like 6 performances of the previews of Romeo and Juliet because I've been writing my own book for the last 2.5 years, and it's thrown me into all these like creative places, and I happened to be there for a week in New York, and I never got to give you a tarot deck because work kept getting in the way, and I couldn't get to a store to buy a tarot deck.
Oh.
And so I didn't give it to you. And then I got your book, and I was like, she doesn't need a tarot deck from me. She's like,
Got many.
yeah.
But I'll take it.
But it was sort
I'll
of,
take anything free.
I've had this like pull. I'm a psychotherapist who's also a medium, so I've had this pull with the tarot, and in various situations, I've been like, you have to give somebody this deck of, like I gave Joe Locke a tarot deck. I gave Dylan Mulvaney a tarot deck, and they were like totally moved when I did that, and I felt like I should give you one, and then this book. So anyway, that's beside the point. The question I wanted to ask you was when you were writing this, because I had this experience of writing my novel, and I went back and I was digging for things that I used in my book to talk about people's experiences and sometimes their traumas and addiction and all that sort of thing. It recapitulated trauma for me. It brought stuff up that I had stuffed on the back shelf for a long time. And I was, trying to write this book, and I'd be like in tears and a wreck. And I wondered, in your process of doing this and going back to those things, did you have big shuddering rifts? Did you have breakthroughs? Did you have those kinds of experiences where it brought all that stuff up?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think there were moments in which I couldn't. There are essays that are not in this book because as I got down that, as I took that exit, I took an immediate U-turn. I was like, I'm not ready yet. I think that it required a certain amount of perspective and like distance to be able to re-investigate these stories. And if I tried to be easy with myself, like not force myself to work through stuff if it wasn't coming. Like it's one thing to like force myself to write and do the work, but it was another thing like if I felt like something was too raw or too hot or crazy, like I would often be able to come back to it at some point, but I also try to practice like some grace with myself, where it's like as much as I enjoy like wallowing in my shit from time to time, I also like don't find it productive all the time. And so I just but yeah, I definitely had those moments in which I had to kind of like press pause, walk the dog, smoke a pack of cigarettes, revisit it in 2 months. Oh yeah.
I'm super interested in reading your book now because of this sort of collage aspect of the way that you've done it. I love the idea that I'm going into what I think is going to be an artistic thing alongside of the storytelling because you're using all different formats and ways of telling the story. I also want to talk a little bit about the title of things that save you, because being saved is coming from such a vulnerable place. You need to be pulled up, pulled out, whatever it is. It's just vulnerable, and it speaks to something, looking for something out there that is just going to yank you up. And I'm asking you, do you still think in your life as you chart through your course that you're still going to find things as you go along that you're going to want to be saved from? And, and is it a continual journey of that needing to be saved until because it is a huge ethos in our Christian Judeo-Christian society to have a savior, to have something that will save us and a person, an idea, an ethos to do it. And I just want to know where you're at with being saved right now, where you think you'll
Oh,
be. And also, I hope that you
never
will
write a
write.
memoir.
This is the last thing I want to say. I hope that you will write other memoirs because I'd like to keep watching this journey.
Watching the avalanche. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Sure. Certainly. I did not grow up. I grew up half Jewish, half Christian, I guess, but really it was just like holidays and presents and like there was no God in my house. So what I grew up with is here. Thought that was very funny and it's true. But so I didn't, and I grew up really afraid, like constantly scared. And I would say like I wake up more scared than not scared. And I don't have an explanation for it. I don't have reason for it. And so I have tools now that I've developed through like surviving certain things in my life, but then also wanting to be less scared as a person. I think forever I've wanted to be saved. Yeah. But it wasn't in the sense that like Jesus Christ was gonna like come and save me or I just remember like talking to my therapist when I was like 18, being like high on coke and like rambling about how like I just wish like a rich old man would find me on the street and save me from my destitute life, which was like great. My life was great. Like objectively, my life was totally fine. Like I had like shelter, food, school, like I had all the things. I just was a drug addict and I didn't want to like do things. But I think so the saving has taken many different shapes and forms and modalities, but like, I still do it now. It's like if I'm feeling like even a little bit of like a sick feeling, I'm like, well, I need an IV and I need 14 different kinds of vitamins pumped through my body and I need like I want the fix. I want the fix to happen. And I think some people are not like that. And it's strange. Some people are just so self-assured and like comfortable and cozy and like or not even or they just like have a certain kind of like innate faith that for me has had to be worked for and developed. And I feel less like I need people, places, things to save me, which isn't to say like I'm living my life as a bumper sticker in which I've saved myself when no one could. It's just to say that like I'm less afraid of what would happen if I wasn't saved. Like I'm less afraid of that. And that feels liberating in and of itself. And something about this did offer me this perspective that's like, you are going to be fine. Like so many things happened that were your fault and not your fault. And questionably, the fault was questionable, depending on who's telling the story. And so it's like, you just, at the end of the day though, you're like, and you moved through it and you're here and you're alive and your heart's beating and you have oxygen and, that's all I can hope for at this moment. But yeah, I think I'll always want to be saved. But I also really like doing the saving. I don't talk about that enough in this book. But I
Next memoir.
love
Next
saving.
memoir.
I'm like, maybe I can save you and fix you.
We're going to take one last question.
Hi, I think you're so cool.
Hi.
This is super surreal.
Oh, thank
I have
you.
2 questions. One,
Yes.
how's Bruce doing? I love the
Bruce
updates.
is my cat. Somebody made the most beautiful needlepoint of him. He's like Bella Hadid. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, he's stunning. He's great. He's great. Cats are great. I don't know what took me so long.
Thank you. I was curious.
He's healthy.
Second
He's
thing,
well.
just as, a 20-year-old who's like, what the fuck is going on? Trying to figure out where I'm going, what I'm doing. What kind of advice do you have, just for anyone, just about anything ever that's you wish someone told you? Just anything.
Transition now. No, I'm kidding. Take the hormones. No, I'm joking. This isn't live streamed, is it? It is. Okay, great. We're gonna cut that out before I get fucking doxxed. What is the advice I have for you? I have a rule, and part of this is because I was on a show that dealt with really intense mental health topics and suicidal ideation and um, all of the things that I really try not to give advice. And this isn't a cop out. This is to say, like, what I can offer you is the perspective of having been 20 and knowing that at 20 I didn't think I would make it to 23 and I've made it to 33. And I think part of that is just acting as if, like that was the thing that helped me to a certain degree, is like my life didn't feel together. I didn't know what I was doing, but like if I could find the smallest morsel of a thread to pull, let me just pull that thread. And sometimes it would rip immediately and that wasn't the thread to pull, but like sometimes it led to a creative path or a journey or meeting somebody else and finding some sort of like community within that. But I think ultimately, it's just like I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, it gets better and the world gets less confusing, because I don't think that's been the case for me. But what I can say is that like with time and like my frontal lobe, which yours hasn't come yet, but when it comes, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. Often I think one of the things that was most helpful for me was when my therapist was like, yeah, you feel this way because of your biology. Nothing with gender, identity, anything like that. It was like, no, 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 no. Like this is your brain right now. But your brain will calcify and solidify and focus and form so long as you stop smoking meth. Not saying that you're smoking meth. I'm just saying some of us were when we were 20 and some of us were not. And the differences are clear now. Some of us have lived, and some of us have not. No, but I think what I'll say is it's when the world has felt, at that time when the world felt like especially murky and gray and scary and confusing, and people didn't make sense and things just would happen or not happen, or I'd start comparing myself to other people, and then the despair would settle in and wrap me in like a 4-day long coma blanket. I just think like I just had to be like, oh right, my brain's not there yet. Like I'm just not there yet. I talked to my younger cousins about this too, where I'm like, your brain has not developed. Like you're not supposed to know. Like you're not supposed to have the tools. And I think part of the like danger of TikTok and like Instagram and like influencer culture in particular, having like twirled around the sun a few times, is that it gives you this like false sense of what success is supposed to look like or feel like. Probably liken it to maybe how I felt with like Justin Bieber when he was like 15, but like that seems like a really hard way to live too. So what I'll say is like this like myth that we need to have things figured out at a certain point is just not true. Like I think 20 is so young. And I can't believe I'm saying that, because I still think 33 is so young.
Yeah.
And I still
We're
think
babies.
40 is so young.
You
It's
guys
like,
are babies.
so what I can say is like, if the world starts to feel like overwhelming and crazy, just like know that that's probably true, and like your brain is still forming. So like it's okay to just read a book.
I have to say you're so delightful, and I'm twice your age, and yet I found myself, and haven't dealt with a lot of what you have. I've dealt with other stuff, but I found you have this relatability, and it's beautiful. It's like, I think because you're authentic and you make yourself vulnerable and you're funny, and so I can't wait to read the book, and I hope everybody here purchases the book and reads it and gives it to friends, because just having experienced this event makes me feel like it's just going to be extremely powerful. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank
Thank
you
you
for
guys for
coming.
being
And if you
here.
have
Thank
a
you,
book,
Chloe.